and welcome to My Career in Data, a podcast where we discuss with industry leaders and experts how they have built their careers. I'm your host, Shannon Kemp, and today we're talking to Tim Alexander from Yellowbrick Data.
With a robust catalog of courses offered on demand and industry-leading live online sessions throughout the year, the DATAVERSITY Training Center is your launchpad for career success. Browse the complete catalog at training.dataversity.net and use code DVTalks for 20% off your purchase.
Hello and welcome. My name is Shannon Kemp, and I'm the Chief Digital Officer at DATAVERSITY, and this is My Career in Data, a DATAVERSITY Talks podcast dedicated to learning from those who have careers in data management, to understand how they got there, and to talk with people who help make those careers a little bit easier. To keep up to date in the latest in data management education, go to dataversity.net/subscribe. Today, we are joined by Tim Alexander, Director of Technical Product Marketing at Yellowbrick Data. And normally this is where a podcast host would read a short bio of the guest, but in this podcast, your bio is what we're here to talk about. Tim, hello and welcome.
Hello. Thank you so much, Shannon, for having me on today.
Thanks for joining us. So tell me, okay, so you're the Director of Technical Product Marketing at Yellowbrick Data. So first, let's start with what kind of company is Yellowbrick Data?
So Yellowbrick Data is a SQL data platform that is incredibly high performance and can run effectively anywhere. So while there's a lot of cloud providers out there who have data warehouses that are kind of just off the shelf and do what they do, Yellowbrick is extremely focused on handling workloads that need high performance and oftentimes need to be extremely secure. So think banks and governments and and companies that are not necessarily ready to just hand their data over to third-party companies and just process the largest amounts of data in the world. That's what Yellowbrick really focuses on.
Oh, very, very cool. And I assume, okay, I have to ask, I assume that the name Yellowbrick is intentionally meant to make me think of the Yellowbrick Road from The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, it's when I joined the company, because I was kind of like, how much do they lean into it? And apparently, like internally, we have servers that are named after like the different witches and the whole, like everything is very much on the nose with that stuff.
I love it.
But the story that was told to me as I joined is that we come from a background of dealing with hardware, so the big infrastructure racks, and you could take entire racks of database servers and replace them with our little machine, which was Yellow. And so you essentially could take an entire rack of servers and replace it with just one little yellow brick, and that was kind of where the name comes from.
So it's very punny.
Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah. We are. It's a dad joke kind of place.
Oh, I love it. Fun. So fun. Okay. Well, so as the Director of Technical Product Marketing, tell me, what is it that you do?
So product marketing is all about understanding what are the problems that we are facing with our customers, and like how are we solving them, and more specifically, how do we communicate how it is that we're solving those specific problems. And so when it comes to the technical side of the product marketing, I'm a little bit more focused on trying to make it really clear the feature-based benefits of kind of like what Yellowbrick is bringing to the table, kind of trying to, what I would describe explain in normal people speak kind of what it is that we do. So that means that I'm doing a lot of things around coming up with messaging around the new things that we're rolling out, testing that messaging in the market, both with our customers and with different types of panels that we do, and just making sure that any way that you can learn about Yellowbrick is something that is very consistent and something that is accurate and is something that is presuming that the audience is the audience that's actually going to need to consume this stuff. So sometimes that means being very technical, and sometimes that means knowing not to be overly technical.
Very cool. I like that a lot. So tell me, well, then how do you specifically work with data in your day-to-day job?
Sure. So, in a lot of different ways. So, one of the things that I'm most responsible for is the trial experience, which we are actively uh, working on and changing and is evolving and will continue to evolve over the next few years. We have a tricky scenario because we have a platform that like we're not a cloud provider. Like there's nothing where you can say, "Okay, can I host my data with Yellowbrick?" And Yellowbrick somehow has your data. Like there's no scenario for that. So we are a tool that you kind of have to stand up in your own environment, whether that be on your on premises or inside the cloud. So creating a trial experience for that is a little bit trickier. And so we do a lot of stuff around testing first early. We literally get data back from the different panels that we run to say like, well, what do you think about this experience? What do you think about that experience? What do you like about it? What do you don't like about it? What's your perception? So there's a lot of qualitative stuff that we end up having to quantify to understand where we should be going. And then we also, wherever we can, we're trying to actually get more signals for who's hitting our site, who's hitting our trial pages, who's like actually like what are our conversion rates on all of those pages, and what is synthesizing that the noise that there is there and find out, okay, well, like what signal should we be taking from that? That's a lot of what I'm doing with the data.
Oh, very cool. It's always fascinating to hear how people work with data. There's so many different ways.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, it's wild.
yeah. So okay. So let's back this up, Tim.
Mm,
So let's talk about how you got into this role. So tell me,
sure.
when you were, say, 6 years old, let's back it all the way up. What was the dream? What did your 6-year-old self want to be?
6-year-old self, I think that I'm like everybody else is I feel like in my age bracket. I wanted to be a paleontologist. Once I learned that there was such a thing as a person who works with dinosaurs and finds dinosaur bones, I was like, yes, yes, there's a job for me in this life. And so I 100% started that. It's almost like, I would leave that out of my story, except for my mom might hear this. She'd be like, I know what you really wanted to be.
I
So
love it.
I started, that was my childhood dream. But then when I got into like later high school and early college, I started learning about the music industry.
Uh-huh.
And I really wasn't. I mean, I sung a little bit, but I really wasn't gonna like be a musician or anything. But I learned about talent agencies, and I was like, that's cool. And I really wanted to be a talent agent. And so when I was in college, I actually ended up interning for 2 summers at a talent agency that still exists. And then for a job that was just out of college, I actually joined the William Morris Agency, which is one of the biggest talent agencies in the world, and it is very much still a thing. So I worked in their music department for about 3 months. I saw what it's really like, and I was like, this is not for me. And I quickly exited. And from there, I had actually just left a job that was at a little corporate tax accounting software called TaxStream, and so I ended up, instead of going, I went the natural route from like music to tax accounting software, and that was my beginning of my real career because I started off essentially as a sales engineer and did that for the first half of my career, like 11
Then
years.
backing up just a little bit. So what did you study in college then to
Mm.
facilitate the music career?
I was in I think I was in the second round of classes for like the second round of I guess the second cohort of a degree that had just started up at Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken, New Jersey, called Business and Technology.
Mm.
So it was a fantastic program then. I'm sure it's drastically evolved from what it was then, but essentially was a degree where you had to take all of the sciences. So you had to do like 2 levels of computer science, 2 levels of physics, 2 levels of chemistry, 2 levels of calculus. But then you also had to do like all of the business classes. So you did organizational management, you did like various levels of finance and accounting, and just a lot of that stuff as well. So it's literally a degree that is meant for bridging the gap between people who speak and think business and people who are like in the weeds on the tech. Like you're supposed to be in the middle, and
Yeah.
that's kind of where I ended up actually.
That's very cool. What made you decide to go that route with the interest in music?
You know, I have a lot of different interests, and that's
Uh-huh.
kind of what ended up happening. I went to do I want as much as I was really into the idea of music. I also knew it was like not the easiest space to be in the world, and I was a complete tech geek. I think probably if you were to look at my high school's website, I think they still mentioned that I was the first person to ever create a website for the high school. It's
Oh,
just
yeah.
I was in I think I created the computer club at my high school, and it was just I had a lot of things where I was just like I was a tech guy,
Yeah.
and so I wanted to be a computer science major. I ended up not doing well in the computer science degree in my first year at Stevens, and then I rather than leaving and doing something completely different, I switched over to business and technology, and it was just like the right sweet spot.
Oh, that's really, really nice. And a very, very much needed skill set to, like you say, to bridge that gap between business and technical.
Very much
Um,
so.
okay, so now you are in tax accounting. So what are you doing? So
Which is
what are
like
you?
the least cool thing to say out loud at a bar, by the way. It's just like it's just not. It's oh, what do you like? What do you do? Tax software? I'm like, oh no, I do tax accounting software. It's like, oh, it's lamer. It's somehow worse. um, but it was great. It was a really fascinating company, and it was I still look back on it actually as a really great example of somebody identifying a real problem in a marketplace and specifically creating a business around solving that problem because it's big, it's hard, it's pervasive, and we like if you looked at the technology that we were creating today, you kind of say this is kind of like a kid's toy, but it did exactly what it needed, and it did for multi-million-dollar corporations like Coca-Cola and like a lot of oil companies. I probably don't need to mention all of them, but we were acquired in 2008 by Thomson Reuters, and so then we
Mhm.
became part of the Thomson Reuters story. And I believe one source tax provision is still a product, and so that was a company that I was employee number like 12 at or something like that. Yeah,
Wow, very
yeah.
cool. That is very cool. So then what? Where did you go?
So from there, I ended up going to during my time in London after so basically after the acquisition in 2008, they sent me on a trip to London for 2 years as an expat to kind of help bridge into that market. And so I was there for a while until we acquired a part of Deloitte that was added into the mix. So I got a really interesting experience going overseas. And then I came back, was back in Thomson Reuters in the US for about another year, and then I went over to Tibco. And Tibco is one of those companies that I kind of feel like a lot of people would not have heard of, and yet they're like a multi-billion-dollar company that is like this, like ultimately like the sixth biggest software company in the world. They merged with Citrix a few years ago. I was part of a team that was responsible for a product called Spotfire, and
Mhm.
Spotfire was competing with Tableau and Qlik kind of in the earlier days of the business intelligence efforts back then. So this is probably 2013.
Mhm.
And I got that was where I really kind of cut my teeth into understanding databases and understanding the business intelligence space. Got a really different lens on things other than just the tax world. And it was really really great. I did a sales engineering role there for about 2 years, and then it was over there that I actually switched into product marketing. So
Hmm.
The role that I was doing at Tibco in the second part of my time there is probably the most similar to what I do right now.
Oh, very interesting.
Visit dataversity.net and expand your knowledge with thousands of articles and blogs written by industry experts, plus free live and on-demand webinars covering the complete data management spectrum. While you're there, subscribe to the weekly newsletter so you'll never miss a beat.
Okay, so tell me, so what's your next transition?
So after that, I ended up hopping to a company called Splash. So all my old tax stream people, I still had a lot of connection with, and so somebody that was a mentor to me and a friend to me was like, "Hey Tim, you got to come help me kick off this new thing," and so I joined this event technology company, and Splash was great. They just sold to Cvent. They were an event registration platform that was really focused on being brand perfect and being very scalable. And so over there, I was running their sales engineering team because that was kind of my true background at the time. And then I always gravitate towards what is like the hard puzzle. And when you're a sales engineer, that's kind of your job, is like figure out how to explain the hard stuff. And the hard stuff at this company Splash was the integrations. So integrations with HubSpot or Salesforce or whatever it is. And so I spent a lot of time learning and becoming an expert at that. And eventually they just made me the product manager of integration over at Splash. And that was how I really kind of transitioned out of my more salesy roles into
Hmm.
really being like, now I'm a product manager. It's a very different lens, and it's a fascinating new challenge. So that's kind of like the path I went down for a while.
Very cool. That sounds like a lot of fun, and I've found, uh, a lot of the commonalities that are amongst data people, which there's so many diversities in how people get into data,
Yeah.
uh, is that passion, right? It's following a passion, really loving to learn, wanting that hard challenge. Um, so very,
Yeah,
very nice.
very
All
much
right.
so. And,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the last piece of this, so what ended up happening, I was at Splash for a while. I was at Splash for maybe 3 years or so, but in that time, that was the lead up to COVID. And
Mhm.
so in 2020, um, I was already in a relationship. I actually had a kid on the way, and COVID was starting to happen. And so I ended up moving down to Australia from New York area.
Oh,
And so that's where I'm based now. I'm based in Sydney.
wow.
And so I left. Me and Splash parted ways, and I still consulted on some of their stuff. And then I joined a company called Goldcast and was there for probably about 2 years. And they were a Boston-based company, so I was just fully remote. But I created their entire integration stack, and I created a lot of other parts of their platform. So that was probably when I got into product management and got out of just integration, but just a larger space. I did that for a while, and then I um, did a bit of consulting down here in Australia and New Zealand, and then eventually ended up at a major broadcaster. So Nine Entertainment is a massive conglomerate of television and newspapers and radio down here in Australia. And I was their senior product manager for ad operations. And I did that for um, probably about 18 months, 19 months or so. Wild world, complete, like the broadcast industry showed me a volume of data that I probably had never really seen processed before. It's like every ad shown anywhere across their entire network is something that they had a lot of data on. And so I did that for a while. And then in November of this past year, so November of 2024, an old colleague of mine from my tax stream days and even in my university days, who was running sales at Yellowbrick, reached out to me. And he was like, hey, I think that what we're looking for is not necessarily an easy person to find, but I think you might be the person. And so that's how I found Yellowbrick, and it was like right down the middle.
Oh, I love that. Wow, the tax accounting software ended up being like such a boon for your career in so many ways.
Oh my God, there's this little company tax stream, and so some of the people who are from it that are very much still in my life.
Yeah,
I never could have imagined it would still be resonating 20 years later.
that's really cool. I love that story. Okay, so tell me, what's been your biggest lesson so far in your career?
So I think that there's been a number of times where I have I haven't had a lot of confidence at first. Like I'm coming into a scenario, and that I'm just like I'm hearing people talk in different acronyms, and they just know how everything works all the time, and I'm kind of like, oh wow, I'm out of my depth. And then I spend maybe, I don't know, call it like 3 to 5 months in some organization. And you find out that every expert, if you scratch them a little bit, is really just a novice underneath. And that has proven to be so true, and that that I should have a lot more confidence in myself, and that like just that little bit of familiarity with what the terms mean. Most of these things are just special terms in an industry that for concepts that aren't that complicated. So I think that that has been something that I had to like get myself to fully remember every single time, that like you should trust in yourself. Like these people are very smart, but you're not dumb, and you can keep up. You just need just give yourself a little bit of credit here, and presume that these people aren't necessarily scary either. Like no one's trying to come after you, so like it's fine to ask the question. So I think that was one like that I learned that type of confidence, especially as a sales engineer. That was a big thing, because you have to come across as confident, and you have to be able to pick new things up pretty quickly. So that was an important thing. Probably more recently, the things that I've personally been going through, because we're always growing, right? We're always getting better at at something. Um, I've been really focusing on understanding politics inside a given organization. And politics is such a dirty word. It's such a loaded word. And people, I think, will say to themselves, like, oh, I'm not the kind of person who I'm not here for the politics. I'm just here to do my job. Or I'm just it's like politics is it's a dirty word. The reality is politics is part of a job. It is not a good thing, and it is not a bad thing. It just is. And being able to navigate the parts of the job that are not, you have to deliver XYZ from a quota, or you have to, become an expert in and troubleshoot blah. Like that's what they're maybe paying you for, to solve this particular problem. But to operate in an organization of people, people are probably the most complicated aspect of it, and it's important to understand how to navigate that stuff. And that's something that I probably tried to outsmart having to worry about politics for a big part of my career. And so that's something that I've been getting a lot better at, and I think a lot more consciously doing. And I think that more people need to do that.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I love the way you put that, because we're all human. We report to humans, all humans, and there's no such thing as a perfect human.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They don't exist.
There's this idea of like, well, I'm just keeping it real, or
Yeah.
the there are certain things where you just don't need to bring it to the organization, and there are certain things that where there's a smarter way to get certain things done, and you have to be aware of getting like what like what's the smart way to get certain goals across the finish line. And it may not be to try and outsmart somebody, or to or even outwork them. It might just be that there's a human solution that you need to know about. And there might be a human blocker that you don't know about. You should be thinking about that stuff. One of the best bits of advice in all of this, and I tell this to everybody, is hallways and not boardrooms. I feel like everybody needs to always remember that a boardroom, a meeting is like where there's a lot of people in it, is never the place for a new thing to come out. If you're doing a presentation that has senior people in it or just a lot of people in it, almost everyone should basically know everything you're about to say. If you're about to drop a new thing, and it's not just like, hey, there's a new holiday party that we're going to throw tomorrow or something like that, then that should be something you should be socializing in the hallways one-on-one with people. And little tidbits like that, they will sound like really obvious, like common knowledge formalized to some people, and other people it'll be revolutionary. So I always tell people that.
Love that advice. That is such good advice, and you're absolutely right. I can think even on decisions I've had to make. When somebody surprised me, I'm like, wait, I don't have time to wrap my brain around this right now. So I'm just gonna have to go on my quick basic instinct, and maybe it's not good because I was shocked. Get it. Great advice. So tell me, having worked with data for so long, what is your definition of data?
That's such a funny way. I mean, I guess data is effectively the recording of all of the things that are happening in the world in whichever way you can record them. That is as broad and yet accurate a definition as I can think of. There is data that we kind of think about that is very simple, easy to comprehend stuff that you can imagine just in a spreadsheet, like a list of people who signed up for a webinar or something like that. That's very easy data to comprehend. But then there's also stuff around the logs that are coming out of some sensor that is in an oil rig 30,000 meters deep. That is also critical. That could be critical data that could be preventing a ecological disaster. And so and then I guess also just the sentimental data that's available out there on the on Twitter or X or whatever social media platform you care about. There's so much happening at all points, and I guess the only thing you can really kind of say is the universal thing is that one way or another we're trying to record as much as we can, and we need we're finding new ways to record as more than ever before, and then we need new tools and new approaches to synthesize all of that recording into things that you can help make the world better. So that's my definition of data.
I like it. I like it very much. So then, do you see the importance of data management and the number of jobs working with data increasing or decreasing over the next 10 years, and why?
I think that data management and data literacy are going to be, it's going to go from kind of a category to a part of the job across all jobs. I don't think that there's going to be, I think there's probably going to be a greater expectation for people to not necessarily know how to write SQL and do a query or something like that, or necessarily even know what a NoSQL database is. They don't necessarily need to know all that. But I do think that there's going to be a need for people to be more data-driven, not just in kind of this marketing speak, which is data-driven analysis and stuff no, you actually have to be able to answer where did you get that from and show your work. I think that's going to be more the norm in more jobs than we currently see today. Right now, I think the amount of companies that are actually data driven in their decision making is even in 2025 far less than anyone would be really willing to admit. So I see that a lot. I think that the security, which is a huge aspect of data management, is clearly going to become more and more important. And so, what like there are some people who are probably even like confused about how things like two-factor authentication works, stuff like that. And people are like, "Oh, I'm not a techie." Like, I think phrases like that are
Mhm.
not going to be acceptable.
Yeah.
So, um, funny enough, though, I also think that it like there will be this as much as being more data literate and understanding of what data management really means being much more valuable and expected. I also think there's going to be a a push in increasing the value of things that are not necessarily data specific. So I think that
Mm.
you'll see, like, I think that in-person events are going to actually matter a lot more. I think that things like hospitality and food, like if people are going to look for, I think there's like this funny over digitization that's making people actually crave more analog experiences. So I think that the future is going to look like this two-pronged thing where you're expected to know how tech works, and then also there's a lot of value in non-techy things.
Oh, I couldn't agree more with that. Yeah, we have a great experience at our conferences, and people are just hungry to be together and network with
Yeah.
and learn from each other and just find out that they're not alone
Yeah.
in what they do. So,
Yeah. And that
mhm.
they exist outside of these like boxes, right? That
Yeah,
of like just screens that are, coming at you with blue light in your eyes all day. Like,
right. Yeah. And like you said, mentioned, so many companies, they're the only data practitioner in their company, right?
right.
So they, to meet up with other data practitioners, it's really helpful.
Yeah.
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 Um, so you've already given a great piece of advice. Do you have any other advice for people looking to get into a career in data management?
Um, so when you think about data management, like I would actually parse them apart. If you think of, like data management, if you're going to get into data and you're not really sure where to start, then I would actually start with SQL. And the reason that I would do that is because one, there's a ton of classes online for free for various types of learners. If you're the person who likes to read something and then like try it off on your own, you can do that. If you want to watch videos, free videos all over the place. And if you want like, little modules or little games, there's a million of those too. But SQL is nice and logical. Like if you ever use a spreadsheet, then you're not that far off from understanding how SQL actually works anyway. And it ends up allowing you to then branch off into all of these other places where you'll start to learn how these different worlds connect. There's things like Python, there's things like Spark, things like JavaScript. There's all these different directions inside of the technology sphere that you are going to naturally hit because you're just asking yourself another question, you're learning another thing. And I feel like SQL is a very approachable starting place for that kind of stuff. And the reality is, if you're going to be in data, everyone's good. You may not be doing SQL all day, but you should know what it is and how it works. Just the fundamentals of like what's happening when you're asking somebody else to do something. And then on the management side, um, I guess I'm alluding to what I said before, but the most complicated part of any job is not the technology, it's the humans. And so you should over-index on learning things that might feel like common knowledge formalized, but there's a lot of techniques and learnings the hard ways that you should try to learn for yourself earlier. There's a couple of books that have been recommended to me over time. Um, Measure What Matters is a great book on OKRs. Highly it's still incredibly relevant today. Highly recommend people read it. If you're getting into a new job, you should absolutely read the first 90 days That's been a book that every Harvard Business School student has to read, and it's so felt like it was talking to me when I first read this book, that it was so clear that I am going through such a universal experience, that this person was able to write a book that sounded like he was writing the story of Tim Alexander's career up until now. So highly recommend that for like understanding how to think about getting into a new role, how to think about like what your job is, both your functional job and your job rec, and the politics side of it, like what you should be doing to figure that stuff out. And then a book that an old friend of mine, a guy named Andy Rentmore, from my London days, recommended, was this The 1 Minute Manager. And I think it's a book that everybody at Deloitte was supposed to read. And it's basically a management book in the form of a hypothetical story. And I still pull that book open every once in a while, and I still like have little techniques that I use from this. I think it was like a 70-page book or something like that. It was tiny, but it's very, very good at reframing ways to like what you should be doing if you're going to manage somebody. You know, like overinvest upfront so that they really feel supported and know what they're doing, so that you actually get the most out of them longer term. Stuff like that.
Oh, I like that. I have not read The 1 Minute Manager. That is now on my list. I have read The First 90 Days, and I have I was about to pull out my copy, but most people won't see. But like there's tabs in there, it's highlighted, there's marks, there's pen marks all through it. Yeah, I've overused that a lot.
Was it the same? Did you have the same experience where you're just like the author's saying stuff and you're like, oh, yeah. Were you in that meeting with me?
Yeah, it's really good. I'm with you. Yeah, it's a great book. Oh, well, Tim, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
No, I love this. This is an absolute pleasure.
And Tim, and I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, if somebody wanted to learn more about Yellowbrick Data, where would they go?
Oh, of course, go to yellowbrick.com.
Perfect. I love it. Well, thank you so much. And to all of our listeners out there, if you like to keep up to date on the latest in podcasts and the latest in data management education, you may go to dataversity.net/subscribe. Until next time, stay curious, everyone. Thank you for listening to DATAVERSITY Talks, a podcast brought to you by DATAVERSITY. Subscribe to our newsletter for podcast updates and information about our free educational webinars at dataversity.net/subscribe.